Is this on?
Yes, my lord.
Good. Hello, this is God speaking. Can we dial that down?
Yes, my lord.
Thanks. Welcome, new arrival to the Eternity Ward. Please take a number and make your way down to the left or the right to the waiting room. All you need is the refreshments I made just for you. I would tell you to steer clear of the apples, they're forbidden, and the two snakes. I mean, fools, sorry, that are chewing the fat in the corner, but you probably wouldn't listen anyway. So good luck, I bless you, and on your way.
Welcome to the Eternity Ward, where we flick through old copies of Reader's Digest and chat with our buddies while we wait for an appointment with God. I'm Nick McKinnon.
And I'm Chris Adams. How you going, Nick?
I'm doing well, Chris, and before we get to how I'm doing, I'm very intent on asking how you're doing.
I'm doing well. I'm good. All good.
Good.
All is well.
How's your car?
Well.
How's your dog?
Well.
How's your wife?
Well.
How's your worms Armageddon?
Yeah, I'm killing it. Killing it.
Murderer.
They're just worms. They don't have souls. They're just pixels.
At least we can agree on that, Chris. So we're here today, Chris, to stand in front of God and in front of our peers to become lawfully wedded partners. Is that what you thought we were here for?
I didn't get the memo. I knew that we were talking about marriage equality, but...
Chris, don't start.
Don't start?
This is the linguistic gymnastics that people play on either side of the debate. When you call it marriage equality, you're inferring that things are unequal or unequal would be the proper term right now. And so what you're saying is that anyone that is against it is against equality, the bastards.
Would you prefer that I called it same-sex marriage?
I would prefer that you called it same-sex marriage, Chris.
Really?
I really would. I really think this matters. Because, so what happens is the words we use...
Yeah, I know what happens. I specifically use the word marriage equality for a reason.
Because you want to demonise the people on the other side of the debate.
I'm aware that, yeah, people can use same-sex marriage or they can use marriage equality and it can frame how you feel about it in different ways. How would you describe the differences between those two terms?
Yeah, well, so I think when you use the term marriage equality, in your own mind, you are saying that people that disagree with this are the same sort of people that were against all the other equality struggles in the past, so racial ones and gender ones and that sort of thing. And I don't think that's fair for marriage equality. I think you need to debate the issues on their own merits and not link them to things in the past. And I think we need to see each other as human beings and not as you're wrong and I'm right. And so anything that allows you to marginalise the opposition and see them as less than humans, I think is unhelpful for you, Chris, not for anyone else, but for you.
So should some of the things in the past, like the civil rights movement, have had a different name, or is that sits fine with you?
No, it's fine with me.
So how is marriage equality that much different to civil rights? Because we're talking about equality.
Yeah, okay, you win.
I actually had someone today, spoke to them today and said, I'm recording a podcast about same-sex marriage. And they said to me, and this is why I came on and called it marriage equality, they said to me, most of the people I hear that say same-sex marriage are people who are no voters.
Yeah.
And most of the people who say marriage equality are people who are yes voters.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, maybe I should be saying marriage equality. That's all. Because I'm a
Tip you
yes
had
voter,
at the start, Chris.
Yeah. So we're already debating whether it's marriage equality or same-sex marriage. Is this just political correctness gone crazy?
I hate political correctness, Chris.
Do you?
Hate it.
See, well,
I hate it.
There's another thing we can debate about.
Not on this podcast, Chris.
Because I'm like,
Jeez.
if you hate political correctness, do you just want political incorrectness? Is that what you're looking for?
No. I want people to be feel free to say whatever they actually believe. I don't want people to hide their beliefs because I think that's where darkness enters the human soul, Chris.
Yeah, and can't that happen within a politically correct forum? Can you not share what you believe within a politically correct forum? I guess for some people it doesn't feel like you can at the moment.
I'm with Matt Caravan on this one, Chris. I don't know if you heard what he said.
I don't think I did.
Oh, don't you? Oh, that means I'm going to have to look it up. That's unfortunate. I don't know. He said something along the lines of this idea that it's been a vitriolic campaign was brought up, and he essentially said, we're a bunch of shrinking violets who are pretending there's all this vitriolic stuff going on when really the debate has been very civil. And like obviously there's been stuff said at the extremes, but geez, if you're going to take that as being mainstream beliefs, then you're not going to have any conversation ever. I actually do agree with him. Like I haven't heard anything remotely rude or, like you hear stuff that's condescending, but I mean, if I'm honest, most of that comes from the left. Most of the stuff that I've seen that is labelling and marginalising is from people on the left who are saying that, everyone that disagrees with marriage equality or same-sex marriage is a bigot and a homophobe. And I just think that's so far from the truth. If you actually listen to the heart of people that are brave enough to share their views, the vast majority of them just have quite reasonable objections. Like you don't have to agree with their points of view, but you can listen to them and try to understand with empathy where they're coming from and not just shout them down. So, I think the debate's been very respectful and certainly on the no side of things, I haven't heard anything anywhere near offensive.
One thing that I do, and I've always been proud of when it comes to Australia and political debate, is that no one's killing anyone over these issues.
Oh, but the children are all going to kill themselves, Chris, if we have this debate.
Well, are we going to go into that topic first?
That's probably not a good place to start.
No, we will get to that. We'll definitely
Should
get
we
to
actually
that.
outline what we're talking about?
Okay, well, sure. What are we talking about? We're talking about...
Where do we live, Chris?
We live in Australia, where there's a postal survey going on at the moment. And that postal survey has been asking all of Australia a question, and they spent $122 million to ask the Australian people the question of, should we allow same-sex marriage so that one party within the government can decide whether or not they're going to have a conscience vote on that issue? And so all of Australia's talking about it, and we're going to have our 2 cents.
Yes, we are. Have you voted, Chris?
I have. And it was interesting, like I said just up the top there, that I'm a yes voter. And I sort of remember the days when we didn't just share with everyone what we voted for. Everyone sort of kept that sort of thing to themselves.
Pathetic.
But nowadays, we just all you pick a side. Even if you don't pick a side, people are saying what they stand for, and which I don't mind. Even organisations are saying what they stand for. We've got football organisations. We have councils putting up all sorts of things on their council buildings to say vote yes. So just all sorts of businesses are aligning themselves with a particular side of the debate, and just about all of those ones that are publicly aligning themselves with anything are aligning themselves with the yes vote. Because aligning yourself with the no vote, you can be, generally the majority of the Australian people support the idea of same-sex marriage. We're about to find out if that's true.
Overwhelmingly. We already know it's true, Chris. You know how we know it's true?
Polls.
No.
How do we know it's true?
How do we know it's true, Chris? Polls can be wrong. The only time I've bet money, Chris, was on Trump losing the election. Polls are wrong. At least they were on that occasion. And I lost $25. No, it was $100. I lost $100.
Really?
The only time I've ever bet money on something.
Yeah, I've never done. I don't gamble.
I bet the hour after the pussy grabbing thing came out, and I thought, geez, these odds are going to plummet. And I thought, I better get in now because I'm going to make some money.
Yeah.
Because surely no one's going to vote for someone that advocates grabbing women's genitals. I was wrong. People do still vote for people like that. Anyway,
Corey Bernardi has come out and said he's a bit of a far right-wing politician in Australia. He's come out and said that he's not giving up the vote.
why would you?
He believes that a lot of people are voting no and claiming that they're voting yes because they're scared of what people are going to say if people think that they're voting no. And he thinks that it's very much potentially another Trump/Brexit result that we may end up with here.
Yeah, he's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's how we know, Chris.
How do we know?
Here's how we know, because every single organisation that has a financial interest is publicly saying, yes, Telstra, we support gay marriage. Every single company out there is just fully behind the yes campaign. And the only reason, like, they don't care about marriage equality. They care about making money. And so the only reason they do it is because they think there's money in it. And they are not stupid. None of these companies are stupid. They know what they're doing. And so they go, all right, the vast majority of people support same-sex marriage. Let's get out there quickly and say that we do too, because then there's going to be money in it and we won't look like some backwards company. We'll look like a progressive, forward-looking company and we will make money out of it. That's how you know, Chris.
Okay.
Watch the money.
Yeah. All right. So it's going to happen.
It is going to happen. And I'm the person that lost money on Trump. So my word is absolutely infallible.
Have you voted yet?
I have voted yet.
You have voted yet.
I was not quick to vote, but I was quick enough.
Did you need to deliberate on what you were going to choose between yes and no?
I did 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not in the recent history, no. But so I think for me, the place to start is that what we're talking about isn't homosexuality, like whether that's right or wrong. Like what we're voting on is the law. It's should it be legal or illegal for same-sex people to be married. Mm-hmm. And so that's what it's about. And so anytime the law is involved, in my mind, it comes down to what are the benefits and harms that will come from changing that law. I think you and I both agree. I think most Australians probably agree that we shouldn't even be having this postal plebiscite. Politicians, if they were doing their bloody job, would sort this out themselves. That being said, I've got no problem with us actually doing it because if it helps move the discussion forward, I think that's fine. And like the arguments against having the plebiscite were that it could cause harm to the poor minority people who are vulnerable, and I just think that's so condescending. Like the idea that gay people are just so weak and fragile that they can't handle having a discussion that they've already had their whole life is just ridiculous. It's blatantly inaccurate. The only thing you can argue is the $122 million. And, I agree, it's a waste of money. But then every time Parliament sits, it costs millions and millions of dollars. So I don't know. Yeah,
it's hard to gauge whether 122 is a lot, isn't it?
It's a lot for you and me, but it's not a lot for the government. Yeah. So, I don't know.
I'd still argue with you that having the postal survey in the first place, has that been harmful at all to the gay community? I mean, I'm not part of the gay community, so I'd need to ask the gay community. But surely if anyone's got a thick skin, they would have to have developed one by now, right?
You would have to.
You'd have to.
Yeah. To come out as gay has got to be a difficult thing. I mean, you and I have both worked with young people who have gone through that process of discovering who they are. From me observing it, it seems like a very difficult thing to go through and to come to terms with who you are. The teenage years are hard enough without that sort of added complexity. And in the places I've worked in, whether or not there is actual bullying that takes place, there probably is. I'm not saying there isn't, but whether there is or not is almost beside the point because the person that is going through it just assumes there will be. And so just that is bad enough, even if there's no real threat, even if it's just perceived. Like that perceived threat is just huge and makes a massive impact on someone's self-worth and self-esteem and all that sort of stuff. And if you feel like you have to hide from everyone an integral part of yourself, like all that sort of stuff is just horrendous. And so the idea that these people can't cope with a public debate is just, to me, it's ludicrous.
But it's bringing it all out in the public. They're hearing a lot of these negative messages that, I'm sure they've heard before, but they're hearing them every day because this is a public debate which is going on. They're seeing it on ads on television. It's in
Give
their,
me the
it's in their face.
Give me the three worst things that you've heard no campaigners say.
Well, it's been interesting. The no campaigners almost don't even really address homosexuality. They do seem to be talking more about if we allow same-sex marriage, then we're going to end up with the Safe Schools program in schools all around the country. And that's what they're worried about, is that we're going to have a different sort of sex education for our young people, which is going to promote a gay lifestyle. That's sort of the thing that they've been going on about a lot. It's sort of like they've been trying to redirect. For me, they almost hardly even talk about same-sex marriage. They talk about these other issues.
Yeah.
I think because they know that they're probably going to lose the debate if they talk about homosexuality.
Yeah, I agree with the first part of that. I don't necessarily agree that that's why they do it.
Right.
Because they assume they're going to lose the debate. I mean, a lot of these people are religious people who believe that it's God's will. And so they would believe that God will win the day ultimately. So they probably don't see it as a fait complete that homosexuality is going to be legal, like Corey Bernardi was saying. But is that your way of agreeing that the No campaign haven't said horrific things about gay people?
There's nothing specifically that comes to mind. I mean, I just think some of the way that you treat another person as a second-class citizen is horrific in itself. But like, I haven't even heard no people coming out saying, hey, you're going to hell. You know, I haven't heard that sort of stuff.
No.
Whereas in the past, we've had all sorts of really horrible things from the religious institutions and just from people in general saying, you know, like during the AIDS crisis where they wanted to put all the gay people on an island so that they would all just die and somehow it would breed homosexuality out of humanity. Which was a really strange logic because all homosexual people come from a sperm and an egg anyway. So it's not like homosexual people come from heterosexual relationships, you know. So how are you going to breed that out?
Yeah, there probably is some logic to it. Sorry, Chris. Because like if you kill, like obviously that's a horrific idea to kill every gay person. I'm not at all defending the morals behind it, but the logic behind it I think is fairly sound, because if you don't kill everyone else and they're allowed to breed, well, they will be furthering their genes. And so that whatever the gay gene is, then that will be passed on.
Is it a gene? Hey, have we discovered if there's a genetic thing?
Everything's a gene, Chris. Okay, well, this is all very interesting, Chris, but I feel like we've sort of avoiding the main question here, which is, what do you, Christian Chris, believe? I think you've already made clear that you support same-sex marriage, or marriage equality as you like to frame it. But give me your best argument so that I can shoot it down in flames.
Avoiding the question is what we do here, isn't it? That's
what you do.
So no, well, okay. I mean, even you said that if you'd had this question 10 years ago, you would have felt differently. Yeah, 10 years ago, or 11 or 12 years ago, probably to be more precise, I would have felt differently too. I grew up believing that homosexuality was a sin. I don't think anyone ever really told me that that was the case. Not like it was drummed into me, but I think I just sort of picked it up through my skin, be that through things I heard maybe in church, be that through just society in general, whatever. I had this idea that homosexuality was a sin. And I ended up having to challenge that perception when I started to meet gay people, and they were people. And I used to, I guess, debate with my gay friends, much like debating you. And much like debating you, I'd lose those debates.
So you say.
But eventually, unlike you, they actually swayed me.
They swayed you.
Yes, they swayed me. But that was a long journey of years of me battling with and wrestling with God, trying to understand what I believed, and having to go through those Bible verses and try and understand. Now I've got the word homosexual crossed out of my Bible. That's a new interpretation. We didn't have the word homosexual until like mid last century, sort of thing. So
what word did they use? Just like man who likes to put penis in arsehole.
But so I had to try and understand what the Bible said. I had to understand what my gay friend said. I read books. As I've said previously, I would swear at God and try and understand what God was saying about it. The biggest thing that sort of changed for me was when it finally dawned on me that I'd never chose my sexual orientation. So why did I think that a gay person was choosing their sexual orientation? So if they weren't choosing their sexual orientation, then how could they be held to account? There was this gradual awakening for me, or maybe it was really quick, I can't remember, but it was like, wow, I like girls. I really like girls. And why would that be any different for someone who had a different orientation?
What do you like about girls, Kris?
Oh, where do I start? But it was
Boobs.
Yeah, boobs. I like boobs. Sure. So I came to the
Sorry.
I came to the realization that homosexuality was natural. Well, it's either natural or an intended purpose by God. If God exists, then it's an intended thing. So it's natural. It's fine. And that felt good to come to that realization. I've been wrestling and feeling bad about it for so long. And I got to that point and I went, this feels good. This feels right. This feels freeing. This works. And whether there's a gay gene or whatever, I just don't think that we're going to end up with any more or less gay people no matter what we do. We're just going to have somewhere between 3 and 10% of people are born gay, and to deprive them of equality is wrong. So I do think saying no to same-sex marriage and believing against that is a wrong belief, because I think that it harms other people. But I also have to maintain that, yes, I was in a different place 12 years ago and I've moved and I've changed. And I wouldn't demonize the me 12 years ago. So why should I demonize someone now who holds a different belief? I have to maintain that they are able to wrestle with this issue and to change the world. And I have seen so many people that I know wrestle with the same thing and move their belief. And that's been really encouraging.
Yeah.
And seeing the way that young people respond to this whole issue. You ask them, should a homosexual couple be allowed to marry? And they're like, huh? Why is this even a question? And to see them stand up in their church youth groups and argue against their youth group leaders and stuff, because they have their gay friends and they know that their gay friends are the same as anybody else. And if they can see that the church isn't a safe place for their gay friends, then...
Goodbye, church.
I don't know. Yeah. Goodbye, church. I think the church is just shooting themselves in the foot by being so gung-ho about this. They're not necessarily talking about homosexuality a lot. They're talking more about same-sex marriage. But I think that they're still hung up on sexuality, and that's where the motivation comes from to vote no a lot. I can't say that that's the same with everyone. Different people are going to come from a different place. But so I went on a journey, and here I am. What about you?
Well, can I just ask a question about that first?
Sure.
So it sounds to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but that life experiences and relationships that you had and all those sort of things are the thing that changed your mind, that was instilled in you by religion. Like, not necessarily explicitly from, your parents or anything like that, but it's just it seeped into your brain somehow.
It seeped in. It felt like it was something that my psyche had been indoctrinated with, and I had to clean it out.
Yeah.
When I cleaned it out, I felt better. That goes for a bunch of other things. And not all of those messages came from religion. Society was pretty harsh towards homosexuality for a long time. So the messages can come from a whole bunch of different areas, but you pick them up.
But I think there are plenty of verses in the Bible that are very easily interpreted as saying God doesn't approve of homosexuality. Like, I know you don't read them that way now, but like, you can see where people get that religious position from. Like, it's not a strange interpretation.
Absolutely. I can see that.
So, like, I would say that religion has been a big part of the problem.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, massive part of the problem. I really... like Jesus talked about the Christians will be known by their fruit, by their actions. What does that tell me about the actions of the church? It was slightly mentioned earlier, the suicide rate in young homosexual people is astronomically high. I guess there's a lot of religious people which will say that the gay lifestyle is to blame for that. They end up in the gay lifestyle and they end up committing suicide because they're in a bad and broken and sinful place.
Because the punishment for being gay is death, Kris. It says that in the Bible.
Well, I can take you on for all those verses if you want.
Romans chapter 1, verse 32, Kris.
All right, Romans chapter 1, verse 32.
Although they knew God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, They not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them. That's you, Chris. You approve of those who practice them.
And that came out of what, Romans 1, 26, 27 beforehand, right?
Correct. Which talked about men lying with men and women with women.
In an unnatural way.
Yeah, because it's unnatural, because natural is man and woman, Chris.
Well, what's unnatural? If I lay with a man and I'm naturally
now you're talking.
heterosexual,
Yeah.
that's unnatural. Do you agree that gay people have a natural orientation towards those of the same sex?
Yes.
Right. So it's not something that they choose. It's not something that they can change.
No.
Right. So they're not actually abandoning or rejecting heterosexuality in the first place.
They certainly are not.
All right. So that's not an option for them. So if applied to gay people, Paul's argument could work in the other direction.
I'm glad you're able to interpret it that way. Do you really think that's what Paul was trying to say with that verse?
I was about to say something really controversial.
Paul wrote it, not God.
No, I was going to say something much more controversial than that.
Well, say it.
There was a theory that Paul was homosexual. Yeah, there was a theory that Paul was homosexual.
Yeah, right. Well, there was a theory that Jesus was too.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I mean, he was never married. He got to 33. I can't imagine getting to 33 without having sex. That's craziness.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're talking about, the gay lifestyle is the thing that, homosexuals die because of that. But I don't know. That's their 1 + 1 = 2 by the religious people, gay lifestyle, death.
Obviously.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think they got their sums a bit wrong. If you are a gay person and you're booted out of your house by your religious family and the church tells you that you're going to hell and society calls you names and turns their back on you or bashes you, then, well, yes, you are going to run to a community that actually accepts you. And two, why doesn't all of that equal the suicide? So that's my 1 + 1 = 2. So I think the church has a massive thing to be responsible for.
Yeah, but the Bible only gives one of those 1 + 1 = 2s. It doesn't give minority plus persecution equals death. It gives homosexuality equals death.
We're talking about 6 tiny verses out of 31,000 verses. Jesus doesn't even talk about homosexuality. We're meant to ignore the laws from Leviticus. A Christian doesn't have to abide by those rules anymore.
Don't they?
No.
All right.
Love God, love your neighbour.
No, Jesus said, I did not come to overturn any of the Old Testament, including Leviticus. Gosh, we're getting off topic.
We are. But just the churches, they've come with, things like the God hates fags. There's the love the sinner, hate the sin. Jesus just said, love the sinner, full stop. And he said, I think if you want to hate sin, hate your own.
No, see, I like the love the sinner, hate the sin thing.
Do you?
That's good. Yeah. I mean, if you're actually doing it, as long as it's not just lip service.
Well, Gandhi used it. Originally came from St. Augustine or something, and he was saying something along those lines. It's been slightly modernized, but then Gandhi used it, but he used it in a way to denounce it as a hateful concept in the sense that it's not really possible to pull off. Like, if you can pull it off, fine, but no one can really pull it off. Just gives a lot of people an excuse to start with hate. They don't start with the love.
Yeah, okay, so we can critique it and say that we don't do it perfectly, but it's still got to be the ideal. Like, I think it's very similar to the Majid Nawaz quote that I've said at least once, that no person is beneath dignity and no idea is above scrutiny.
Yeah.
Like, we have to be able to have a go at any belief, but we also have to be able to absolutely respect every single individual. I think in this debate, I think the No campaign have been doing that, and I don't actually think that the Yes side has been doing it that well.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think they have been hating the sinner in their eyes.
Yeah, and maybe you let a little bit of power go because they know that they're probably going to win. But this is it for me. Like, the church has been bashing homosexuality for so long. Here's their chance to get some retribution. So what's this going to mean for the church and Christianity going forward? It reminds me of a lot of it's weird. A lot of what makes up my beliefs come from a movie called The Breakfast Club, which I love.
Hollywood movies is where we get all our ideas from, Chris.
There's this one scene where this principal who's been really oppressive of these students, he's keeping them for detention and he's being really horrible and nasty to these rebellious students. He's talking to the janitor and he says, you know what, the thing that keeps me awake at night, the thing that keeps me awake is that one day these kids are going to have to look after me, you know, when he's in his retirement home or something. And the janitor turns to him and goes, you think so?
You should be worried about that.
He's like, you really think so after the way you're treating them? I think the church is going to pay a bit for the way that they've handled this over the long run. It's going to hurt.
Yeah, I think it already has.
Yeah, and maybe it should.
You were talking earlier about being in youth groups and talking to young people about this issue, and I had the same experience. I was paid to be working for a church with their sort of like their Sunday morning group where the teenagers would come out with me so they didn't have to sit through a boring sermon. And and one of the times, I wanted to talk about homosexuality, and so I just very delicately said, what do you guys think about it? And they all just sort of looked at me like I'm mad and going, what do you mean? Like, of course it's okay. Like, they don't even have the concept that it could possibly be wrong. And these are very Christian kids. Like, I don't want to give anything away about who they were, but they were very Christian.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of very Christian kids. You know, they've been coming out as gay affirming, and that's been a big move for them in the families that they were brought up in. So they're alienating some of their youth. And why? I mean, I don't get why. When we're supposed to have a separation of church and state. And even if you believe it's a sin, just say not in our church, but at least say, hey, you can have a civil marriage. Why not do that?
I think the church really stuffed up there.
Yeah.
Like they should have been able to see the direction this conversation was heading, and they should have been far
Just
more
jumped on that.
proactive and said, look, we will give you a civil thing. Instead of doing that, they just went, no.
Yep.
It's a massive mistake on their part.
Yep. What about you? What was your journey from way back then?
It feels similar to what you articulated, that homosexuality, like I grew up in a Christian community as well, and homosexuality was one of those things that I don't remember anyone overtly preaching about or anything like that. Like, my dad was the pastor at the church, and I can't imagine him ever being Bible bashing and you're going to hell if you're a homosexual or anything like that. He would never have said anything like that. So I didn't hear it from the pulpit. But I think homosexuality, like a few other things, is one of those things that is vehemently condemned by a small number of people and isn't rebutted by everyone else. Everyone else just sort of just sits there silently while these people go on there ranting and raving because they know that the Bible says it and they're uncomfortable with it and they don't know how to get around it, but they generally just throw their hands up in the air and say, I don't know how this makes sense, but I prioritize the verses where Jesus talks about loving everyone and that sort of thing over those verses that don't really make sense to me. And so they don't speak up and say, no, there's nothing wrong with homosexuality, because there's nothing in the Bible that says there's nothing wrong with homosexuality, whereas there is plenty that says that it's, what's the word that Leviticus uses? An abomination.
I find that an interesting word too, abomination, because there are a whole bunch of things that are an abomination, which are some of
shellfish.
Yeah, some of them are ridiculous.
Mixed cloth.
So abomination, in our understanding, is like the worst of the worst of the worst. You know, we're looking at people who wrote this stuff thousands of years ago, and from my understanding, from what I've been reading about the word abomination, is that it's more culturally unacceptable within our culture. So it might be acceptable in your culture, but within our culture here, we've decided that that is culturally unacceptable. That's potentially a better definition than us thinking the worst of the worst of the worst.
And for any non-Christians listening, this is how liberal Christians work out how these things make sense to them.
Well, why not? Why would you not try and work out what it meant to the person writing it in the time? Why do you want to read it all as a literal understanding of just what the words there now, and our understanding of that word is what it's saying? This is people in a different culture, in a different time, with different understandings. You know, so what do they know about science and stuff? Things were different. So you need to understand it within that context. And I don't think any of it's cut and dry and clear, that interpretation, I think it's more just culturally unacceptable. I think.
Sure.
So it's up to us to decide what becomes culturally acceptable, and that's, I guess, what the survey's about. But I want to get back to your reason, your story, Mr. Nick.
So for me, I don't know what changed. I think it was a gradual shift. Like there were certain things, like one of my teachers in college was gay and he was an awesome bloke. Like little things like that, like I went to a Christian school, so none of my teachers, well, actually one of my teachers in high school actually changed genders. That got him fired, in case you were wondering.
Okay.
So yeah, but that was not usual, and it was certainly not celebrated. But yeah, meeting this dude in college who was a teacher and is a gay bloke and was just a lovely bloke, those sort of things blow away the myths that are perpetuated in the silence of the people in church who don't speak. But I think also just I started doubting a whole bunch of things in my faith. I read one book by John Spong, who is the sort of person you would read if you're a liberal person who doesn't want to believe that gay people are going to hell. And he wrote a book about homosexuality, living in sin. I think it's Living in Sin, it's called. And he was just going through all the different verses in the Bible that talk about homosexuality and articulating why they weren't really talking about our modern understanding of homosexuality, that some of them were about homosexual rape or those sort of things, or hospitality, all those sort of things.
Yeah, like Sodom and Gomorrah. Yep.
Yep. So I understand all that stuff, and so I went through that sort of process. But now, which is I think is more interesting, now the way I look at it is, I think all of us seem to agree that marriage is a really positive thing. That for two people to commit to each other, to stick through the hard times, is a really positive thing for relationships. Like I know in my marriage, I've been married for 12 years or something like that. There would have been at least 3, 4, 5 times that we would have called it quits if we were not in a committed relationship. If we hadn't have made that public declaration and the social stigma even that's around getting divorced, if that stuff didn't exist, we would not be together.
And you would have missed out on a lot.
Yeah, I'm really glad we got through those times because like things are really good now and they have been good for quite a while. But like there were some very, very dark days, and for like 2 or 3 years, things were pretty difficult for us. And there's no way we would have got through it without marriage. And so for me, the idea that you withhold that from a group of people, I think it's a justice issue. Like you are forcing these people to be less committed in their relationships, to be more promiscuous, and then you use that as evidence as to why they're not normal people.
Yeah.
And it's just wrong. So one of the issues that's brought up by the No campaign that I find strange, they talk about the impact of children being adopted. They talk about that if homosexual people are able to be married, then it creates the sort of social norm that gay people can be parents, and that they think that it's beneficial for children to have a mother and a father, that there is a biological difference between men and women, and that it's not that that men are better than women or that women are better than men, but just that complementary nature of the two genders is helpful for a young person being raised. I agree with that. I do agree that it is better for a young person to have an example of both how to be a man and how to be a woman and what to expect out of a partner. I think that is really important. The thing I disagree with is it seems blatantly obvious to me that it's already possible for gay people to adopt.
Yep.
Like you don't have to be married to adopt someone. So you can just be a single person and fill in the forms and go through all the psychological tests or whatever, and you can adopt someone. And so this stuff already happens. And so the only thing that will change in terms of children being raised is that they might be being raised in married, stable relationships after this legislation, instead of being non-married relationships which aren't as stable, which aren't as committed, and which won't last as long.
Yeah.
So if you care about children, either you need to be arguing that single people can't adopt, gay people can't adopt, you can't have IVF. I think that's out the door because it's not biological. It's not going to be a biological.
And single mums should be forced to marry someone, right?
Yeah. Yep. You shouldn't be allowed to get divorced if you've got kids. Like,
Yeah.
like, I think you can both say that the best environment for raising a kid is with a mother and a father. And you can say that gay people should be allowed to get married because we do not live in a perfect world. And look, the best environment for kids to be raised probably isn't for a 40-year-old to be having kids either. It's probably better for a kid to be raised by a 25-year-old because a 40-year-old is just getting tired and cranky and...
Yeah.
So, like you would have to legislate a whole bunch of stuff if you want to say that only the perfect people can have kids. And it's just not the real world. And you just got to cope with the idea that, yep, having two men raising a kid or two women raising a kid, there will be deficits there. But there's deficits in any relationship.
Yeah, and I think if you think that there's a deficit there, then for me, the Christian response is that if there was a lesbian couple living next door, they had children, why can't I say, hey, can I be a male role model to your children, and help you? Because it takes a village to raise a child. A lot of people use that term, and we end up in all of these nuclear families, and that doesn't seem to be working very well for a lot of young people. That if we have a wider community helping to raise our children, then they're going to get those male and female role models.
That is true, but I still think that that's not the same as having a mother and a father.
But what about them getting bullied at school for having gay parents?
Yeah, what about it? Is that an argument against it,
Yeah, people do use that argument. The kids are going to get bullied. I do see that argument a lot. That's one that is quite prevalent.
Collingwood supporters shouldn't be allowed to have kids either because you're going to get bullied because your father supports Collingwood.
Yeah, okay. But I'm like, if we allow same-sex marriage as a nation over time, we say that this is okay, this is normal, this is acceptable, then I think that sort of bullying stuff will start disappearing over time.
Yeah.
So if we don't move, then we're always going to have the bullying issue.
Yeah. Can we talk about something that I think we might disagree on?
Sure, go for it.
Because I like talking about those things more than the things we agree on.
I feel like we've found a fair bit to disagree on anyway.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, which is
good.
It's been good. Yeah.
I didn't think there was, but there you go.
Yeah, we like wrestling. Yep.
We like wrestling. So one of the things that the No campaign bring up quite a lot is this Safe Schools program, which has been talked about a lot, which for people that aren't aware of it, Safe Schools is in theory, an anti-bullying program specifically targeted at whatever the acronym is, LGBTIQZAMTPL.
LGBTQIA.
That's what I said. Plus, sometimes people put a plus on the end, Chris.
They do.
Just because they don't want to offend anyone by missing out a letter. Grow up, people. So there's this Safe Schools program specifically targeted at that minority of people. The Christian folk are very white. Well, probably not just Christian folk. I think it's fair to say the vast majority of people that raise this are Christian folk, or religious folk at least. I'm sure Muslims are behind it as well, and Jewish people. So in theory, it's this anti-bullying program, and of course no one would be against an anti-bullying program. But the problem is it has a whole bunch of other, they would say radical gender theory stuff around gender fluidity, how gender isn't biological, it's psychological, and that someone should be able to change their gender whenever they feel like it. I think this is an issue that we might have some disagreement on, because one of the things that I dislike is I think it's dangerous for this issue to be tied to same-sex marriage. So I don't like that the No campaign are raising it in this environment, because I think what it's going to do is people that are voting yes on same-sex marriage, and I believe that's the vast majority of people, I think the vast majority of people think that same-sex marriage is the right thing to do.
Including the vast majority of Christians from the polls, if we believe them.
No, not the vast majority. Yes, the majority.
There was one poll I saw, 65%. Anyway, go on.
Okay, yeah. Well, let's agree it's a majority. I think that's radical enough a statement.
I reckon.
So yes, the majority of Australians will be voting for same-sex marriage, and I think it is very dangerous to put in their heads that supporting same-sex marriage is the same thing as supporting safe schools and supporting this sort of gender fluidity. Because if you get in your head that if you're anti-same-sex marriage, then you're also anti this program, then people will just sort of reflexively support this redefinition of genders, which I think is quite dangerous.
Okay. You think it's quite dangerous?
I do. I think it's children aren't adults. They've still got a lot of developing to do. And if we give them the idea that you can just choose to be whatever you want to be, if you're born with a penis and you can just choose to be female, I just don't think that's the real world. Like, if words mean anything, then male means you have a penis and female means you have a vagina. And what happens is we end up reinforcing the stereotypes that man means a certain thing and that woman means a certain thing. And so if you're a guy who likes fashion, instead of just going, there's nothing wrong with being a guy who likes fashion, we're going to go, oh, I'm a woman. And that's just not true. You can be a guy and like what we would call feminine things. If you're a guy and you like playing with Barbie dolls, there's nothing wrong with that.
You can be a guy who likes wearing a dress. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. I couldn't care less.
Still be a guy. Yeah.
But if instead of fighting those stereotypes, we're reinforcing them and we're saying to young people, like if you're talking about 25-year-olds, I don't care. They can do whatever they want. But if you're talking about 10-year-olds, you're giving them the message that you can choose your gender, and they go, well, if I'm a girl and I like playing football and I like playing with trucks and mucking around with the boys, maybe I'm a boy. I'm going to get a sex change. And everyone around you is going, we support you 100%. We want you to be whoever you want to be. And like, they're positive things, obviously, to say to a young person, but you can say it in a too affirming way that actually pressures them to make a change that is permanent. Like, it's not something you can change back easily. If you start that process, it's a dangerous thing to be telling people that you can change your gender.
Before we go on, can we clarify?
Yes.
That you don't like that this argument is being used by the No campaign around a same-sex marriage survey.
I do not.
So why are you using it right now? Aren't you propagating what they want you to propagate?
Oh, look, you might be right.
Yeah,
Maybe I'm wrong.
But no, I think we can talk about it by all means. But I just wanted you to let's make that clear.
Yeah, I want to make very clear that those two things are separate.
Yeah.
So me personally, I am 100% behind same-sex marriage. I want that to be the reality, and I voted for it. I ticked yes on that box, and I also am very concerned about gender fluidity. I think that is a dangerous message to be telling young, vulnerable people. The No campaign linking those two things together is dangerous because it puts in the mind of yes voters, who are the majority of people, that they are linked.
Well, the Safe Schools program, I think there's been a lot of misinformation about what they do. It's not even meant to be an anti-bullying program. Apparently, it's about trying to make schools a more inclusive place for those people, right? So yes, there is gender stuff in there. But the thing that worries me is like some of the stuff that I've seen said about Safe Schools. I'm going, they're equipping staff to deliver this sort of stuff within a school. And I work within a school. And if a program comes in to deliver something, or whether they give material to the staff to deliver, there's always staff present observing and supervising the students. And they're never going to let anything come into the school which is radically controversial, like some of the stuff that I've heard claimed about what Safe Schools has been doing. If some of the things that I've heard claimed about what Safe Schools is doing is true, then I'm like, whoa, they've gone a bit too far. I'm not convinced that that's what they're doing. I think it's a bit of a beat up, because I'm for a school being a safer place for people to be included. I'm not that concerned about it, because even if, and maybe I should be, listening to you, maybe I should be more concerned about it than what I am. So, there was a part of me which sort of doesn't really care. I'm like, whatever you want to be, that's okay. But yeah, I think make sure first is...
Yeah. I just think we can end up turning these issues into ideological issues. And so people just support it because they see it coming from their camp. And so people on the left just go, yep, I support this because it's only bigots and homophobes that are against it. And so obviously it's a good thing, without even actually thinking about it or engaging in the arguments as to why it might be a bad thing.
But there are, boys and girls do grow up with stereotypes, told to be certain ways, and they don't have to be that. But a boy might like to just play with trains and trucks.
And that's okay.
But what if they want to play with dolls?
That's fine.
That doesn't mean that they are gay or effeminate or genderqueer or anything. But it might be too, and that's well, that should be okay too.
But so instead of putting our effort into fighting for people to be able to change gender, we should be putting our effort into fighting the gender stereotypes.
Yeah.
And saying,
Yeah.
if you're a bloke, that doesn't tell me anything about whether you like fashion. It doesn't tell me anything about whether you like ballet.
Yep.
It just doesn't tell me anything.
Yep.
It tells me you've got a penis. That's all it tells me.
Yeah. Anyway, so
I've got a question for you, Chris. You're a Christian.
yeah.
This is how I like to start questions.
Okay.
So do you think homosexuality is a sin?
No,
Because
it's natural. It's God's intended purpose. If God exists, then that's the way it was meant to be.
and you think you can interpret all verses in the Bible as not meaning that homosexuality is a sin?
Yeah, definitely. If you really look into it and you really explore it, then you can move to a place where those verses aren't as black and white as they appear. You can find reasons to go, you know what, I don't know if this holds up that much anymore. But the other thing is, for me, I'm not just going to rely on the Bible anyway. We've talked about that. That's not my...
Yeah.
I think you're turning the Bible into an idol if you're going to see that as the reference point of all truth. If I'm a Christian, I believe Jesus, God, whatever is where truth is.
Yeah.
But I also get truth from science. So I did a lot of, what does science say about all of this? What do psychologists say about all of this? And then through life experience, what do I get from this from all of the homosexual people that I've come across and had relationships with? So I'm just like, nah, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not a sin. If you don't get to choose your orientation, it can't be a sin. If you got to choose your orientation, okay, all right, you can argue that, but I just can't see it as a choice. Why would you choose that? You've got all of this stuff that you got to deal with. You're a second-class citizen. You get kicked out of your home. You know, like, why would you choose that?
I think some people do choose to be part of minorities.
And if they do, you know what? Good luck to them. That doesn't hurt me.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't change me. That's, again, it's like, okay, some people do choose, but for those that don't choose, how can it be a sin?
Yeah.
I can't see it.
Yeah. That was a big deal for me too. The reason I asked that question is because I had a chat with a local Christian celebrity of Launceston recently.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yep.
And she's a lovely lady. I went to school with her and I think the world of her. Obviously, we disagree on same-sex marriage, but on anything of substance, we agree on.
What? Same-sex marriage is not anything of substance?
It's something of substance, but it's not like how do we treat people? Like she would never say anything negative about homosexual people, for instance.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, I take your point though. It is certainly an issue for many people, and it is a core identity issue for many people, and obviously that's a big issue for them. But so I was talking to her, and one of the things that just struck me is that the main reason she is against same-sex marriage is because of the Bible, because she believes her faith says that homosexuality is not the way God intended the world to be, and because of that, like, confirmation bias kicks in. You go looking for, so children, what about the children? And you just go looking for things that confirm the thing you already believe. And if, like, she was brought up in a Christian environment just like you and I were, and when you're brought up in that environment, it's just reinforced over and over again that homosexuality is not the natural way. It's not the way, like, non-Christians interpret the word sin in a negative way. I guess some Christians talk about it in that way, but I think certainly the way I understood it was sin just means not the way God intended the world to be. So it's not necessarily you're an evil person, it's just that it's not the way God intended it to be. And so, like, that's the way she sees it. And if the Bible were different, she would be different. I know you find interpretations for them that don't lead to a vote against same-sex marriage, but for a lot of Christians, they read the Bible and they go, well, it's obvious. And that's the basis for their opposition to homosexuality. So that's why I raised it, because I think it's an interesting issue.
Yeah, interesting for sure. Why does it always come back to the Bible? If I want to go with Bible, I could go with traditional marriage and end up with a whole heap of concubines, and I don't know.
I think what they would say to that, Chris, is that there's plenty of stuff in the Bible that isn't the way the world was meant to be. So there's stuff in there about people killing people. There's, the story of David getting jealous and deliberately getting a woman's husband killed so that she could marry him. So that's in the Bible, but it's obvious that that's not what the Bible is saying is the best way to live. The combination of those sort of verses where Jesus specifically mentions man and woman, and the Genesis story where God created man and woman, they specifically talk about genders, and then there are specific verses that talk about men shouldn't lie with men and women shouldn't lie with women. And when you put those things together, it's a pretty straightforward interpretation to say that God intended marriage to be one man and one woman.
Okay.
Like, I understand that you disagree with that, but I can understand where they're coming from, and I think their interpretation is a more straightforward interpretation than yours is. That doesn't mean that yours is wrong. It just means that it's pretty obvious where they get their idea from.
People aren't meant to have sex out of wedlock either. They do that. Christians do that too. We are sexual beings, human beings. Sexuality is part of a massive part of the makeup of who we are. And for me, the church seems pretty hung up about sexuality a lot. And there's been a lot of repression and...
So are people.
Yeah, so I guess so. But the Bible sort of says that people shouldn't do these things. Man shouldn't lie with a man, but it never says anything about that someone shouldn't be of a particular orientation. So if someone is born gay, then that's fine, but they're just not allowed to have sex. They're not allowed to be in a commission.
That's exactly what this lady was saying, essentially.
I don't think you can force people to be celibate, to choose celibacy, because
That's not choosing, though, is it?
No, if you're forcing them into it, and even people who do choose celibacy, like the church, I mean, that can be a massive choice because we are sexual beings and it goes against our sexual nature to repress that. You can blow out sideways, man. It's like we've seen.
I can't see how that could be a problem, Chris. Has there been any issues in the church of men who haven't been in sexual relations
far out, just
getting involved in inappropriate relations? I can't think of any.
So I just think religious people need to just be less hung up about sexuality. Like when we're talking about 6 verses and 31,000, I don't think God is that hung up about sexuality. I really don't. Like if God cared that much about homosexuality, would he not made sure that Jesus would been stating a whole lot of things very clearly, about it? So I think this is an issue that it's been left for humanity we've got to figure this out. When we were talking about doing this topic, you mentioned something about you hate the slippery slope argument.
I hate the slippery slope argument.
So the slippery slope argument would be that if we allow gay marriage, then it opens up the door to what? To polygamy. It opens up the door to I've even heard pedophilia thrown around. Like people, match it up with pedophilia, which is freaking offensive in my eyes because that's not a consensual, loving, committed relationships. That's predatory. That's about power. Let's have a survey on that one, see where we get. Because I think it'll be 0.0001%, really, why do people want to bring that into the argument?
I think you're creating a straw man right now, Chris. Yes, I do. I think you're creating an argument that is easily defeated by you. Because, I haven't heard anyone talk about
you haven't?
Polygamy. No. I mean,
okay. I've heard pedophilia and polygamy mentioned.
As in the comment section of some news article?
Yeah.
Or like an actual intellectual?
No, not an actual intellectual, I wouldn't say. I think there's a couple of people in Parliament that have dropped a couple of little things like that. But, yeah, it doesn't happen much. It's more the comment section I'm talking about. So, yeah, go on. Cut me down.
I'm quite confident you can pull out a comment from a news.com article and ridicule them and pretend like they are representative of the No campaign, but I don't think that's fair.
That's fine. All right. So, but anyway, so there's a slippery slope argument.
Yes.
So one of the things that you've been talking about a lot is that people are saying that if we allow same-sex marriage, then we're going to have all of this this gender issue stuff brought forward into schools and so on. Okay. But anyway, what's your opinion on the slippery slope?
Yeah, well, so I was worried at the start of this debate that sort of thing would have come into it. The polygamy and the pedophilia and all that sort of stuff would have come into it. But I've been pleased that hasn't. I haven't heard it at all other than from wacko people. And that's good because we need to be able to debate each individual issue on its merits. And when people talk about the gender theory stuff, I find it very hard to imagine that if you had a postal survey on whether people can change their gender, I just don't think... Well, I mean, there would be some people in favour of it, but I think it'd be the Greens and their supporters, and so it'd be like 10% of the population would support removing gender from our society, and 90% of the people would go, that's batshit crazy. Whereas with the same-sex marriage thing, it's going to be almost the reverse. It won't be 90%, but it'll be, 70 or something like that. And the danger is that, like we talked about before, that if you attach the two, that you can end up convincing more people of gender fluidity than would have been otherwise. Each issue has to be fought on its individual merits, and you have to be able to say what you disagree with about same-sex marriage without bringing in these things that might come down the track.
I often sort of see it not always as a slippery slope. I feel like I'm want to flip it up the other way and say we're trying to drag people up the mountain. It's like, let's get over this obstacle. They feel like we're going backwards and falling into this deep and dark hole. And I'm like going, no, we're going to the summit. Why do we have to see it as we're going down? Aren't we making progress here?
Well, yeah, but that's the way you see it. The people on the other side of the debate don't. They see we're going to hell in a handbasket. You got to be able to see it from the other person's perspective. You have to be able to actually understand their perspective and not just try to argue against it.
How do we do that? This whole debate is causing, and there's been a whole lot of previous debates. It feels to me like, and maybe it's just what I'm seeing, and maybe it's not really real, but it feels like over the past 10 years or so, there's just been more and more things that have been dividing people within our country, and it's harder to bridge the gap between these camps that people fall into. How do we do it? How do we listen to each other?
I think the thing that has really helped me is reflecting back that I have changed my views on certain topics.
Yeah.
Like really sitting with it and really understanding that I believe that I was wrong on issues for 15 years. And I would have been arguing vehemently against myself on a whole bunch of issues, not just this one, but on several other ones.
Bloody hell, man. I'm just letting you know on in the past couple of podcasts, I think I'm starting to change my views on things from the past couple of conversations we've had. So I'm like going, oh, that's all old news now. I want to keep moving, but yeah, go on.
Yeah. So if you allow yourself to acknowledge that I have been wrong, and not beating yourself up, just acknowledging that there's stuff I didn't know or stuff that I didn't fully understand or stuff that I just was plain wrong about, then it helps you to go, well, what else am I wrong about? Like, it helps you to be humble and to say that the stuff that I believe, I still believe it and I believe it strongly, but I'm also wanting to hear from people who believe differently. Because all of a sudden, it's not that I'm right and they're wrong. It's that I hold this view and they've lived a completely different existence to me. And there's stuff that I can learn from them because they've experienced stuff that I haven't experienced. And there's nothing wrong with me saying maybe I'm wrong. It's a sign of strength to say that I believe this, but I could be wrong. And I want to be challenged in my views. I want to hear the best arguments from the other side. I don't want to create straw men where I can just convince myself of my own beliefs and pretend that every person on the other side of the debate is stupid and an idiot and hasn't considered all these things that I've considered. That it could be the other way around, that maybe I'm the stupid one that hasn't considered a whole bunch of these things. And so I want to engage with people who I disagree with, not so I can convince them. I don't want to go into conversations thinking that. I want to go into conversations going, what am I missing? Albert Einstein said, there's no person so stupid that he couldn't learn something from them.
And that's been my experience when I think about it. I think everyone brings something different to the table.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's some certain issues that we probably talk about in following podcasts with all of this division in our world, and social media can play into that, and we end up in our own echo chamber. And so everything that you see just confirms what you already believe, and you don't get to hear the other side of the argument, and creates further and further division. So we're going to have to be pretty creative, I think, if we're going to find ways to feel as one again.
Yep, I agree. If you read abc.net.au every day, I encourage you to delete that from your bookmarks and instead add in theaustralian.com. If you read The Australian every day, delete it, put in The Guardian. Just allowing yourself to hear another person's perspective, another viewpoint, you'll start to actually acknowledge that they have legitimate points of view and they're not just evil. They're not the enemy. They're just other people.
Reckon that's a good place to leave it. Nick?
I hope we've both listened to each other.
What? Yeah. I like listening to my buddy Nick, and as I said, I want to go back and re-record the ones that we've already done, because I'm like, no, I've sort of moved a little bit here and there.
That's all right. You'll have plenty more podcasts to restate your views, Kris.
Looking forward to it. So catch you next time. See ya. Thanks for listening.
Farewell.
God here again. Are you shaking your head incredulously or nodding in approval? Well, if you got something out of this episode, you could really help those poor idiots by contributing to or supporting the Eternity Ward. You can leave reviews on iTunes or wherever you listen to it. You can share it on social media or discuss it in your blog, podcast, or fellowship group. Subscribe, like, nod your head, raise your fist, send a hallelujah. I don't know, but don't send a prayer because I'm